My name is Anna Whitmore. I am 48 years old, and until that Monday morning, I thought I understood how a new CEO usually begins their tenure. They introduce a vision, they listen, then they adjust slowly. I was wrong. Evan Brooks's first leadership meeting took place in the large conference room on the 32nd floor, a room usually reserved for quarterly reports. Every department head was present. The atmosphere was neutral, edged with curiosity. Evan stood at the front, adjusted the microphone, and smiled with the confidence of someone who spoke fluently in numbers. And as usual, this story is a work of fiction, created by our editorial team for storytelling purposes. All characters, events, and organizations are fictional. Any resemblance is purely coincidental. Thank you, and let's continue. The first slide appeared with a bold title, Pay Reform. I frowned slightly. Far too early for a topic like that, especially in a first meeting. Evan didn't elaborate. He clicked to the next slide. What appeared wasn't a high-level overview. It wasn't a budget summary. It was a list of teams with the total salary cost of each, broken down by position. The room's breathing changed. Quiet murmurs spread. Some people straightened in their chairs. Others stared down at their laptops as if hoping to disappear. Evan continued clicking through the slides, his voice even expressionless. Then he stopped. Client operations, he said, still looking at the screen. Anna's team. I felt the weight of eyes turning toward me. Costs are double the industry benchmark. Evan continued. Cut it by 50%. The room went silent. Not polite silence, but the heavy kind where you can hear the air conditioning hum. Evan didn't look at me. He didn't ask for input. He simply instructed his assistant to note it down, as if the decision were already final. I didn't react. I lowered my gaze, opened my notebook, and wrote down his words verbatim, not because I needed to remember them, but because I knew that from that moment on, everything had shifted. The meeting continued. But for me, it was already over. The only question echoing in my mind was, why would a CEO choose to humiliate the strongest team on his very first day? The meeting ended earlier than usual. No one lingered to exchange comments like they normally did. Chairs scraped softly against the floor as people stood almost in unison, avoiding eye contact. I gathered my notebook, capped my pen, and walked down the long hallway toward the elevators. I had barely taken 10 steps when I heard Daniel, the CFO, call my name quietly behind me. Anna. He fell into step beside me, lowering his voice. He doesn't understand how your team actually operates. I didn't slow down. I think he understands perfectly. I said, he just doesn't care. Daniel exhaled, like someone realizing a situation couldn't be salvaged. Your clients aren't one-time buyers, he said. They stay because of relationships, because of crisis management. Cutting like that is coercion. I finished for him. Daniel went silent for a few seconds, then shook his head. That's not how Evan sees it. To him, it's all just cost. That was the moment it clicked. What happened in the meeting wasn't a miscalculation. It was a display of power. Evan needed to prove to the board that he was willing to act even against long-standing leadership. To do that, he needed a target that was visible, impactful, and safe. My team met all three criteria. When I stepped into the elevator, Helen from HR was already inside. As soon as the doors closed, she turned to me without preamble. This isn't just about the budget, she said. You should be careful. How should I take that? I asked. Helen met my eyes. Staying means you accept this as precedent. That night, I sat alone in my office, staring at the roster of my team, the people I'd hired, trained, and protected for years. If I stayed, I would have to explain why their value had suddenly been cut in half for no real reason other than a new CEO needing a quick win. And I knew then he didn't need reform. He needed a sacrifice. The question that wouldn't leave me was he trying to force me to quit the next morning? An email from HR arrived at 7:14 a.m. No dramatic subject line. Just one line, compensation restructuring response required. I opened the attachment at my kitchen table, coffee still cooling beside me. The document was written in the company's familiar language, neutral, polite, entirely emotionless, except the proposed team salary adjustment, or proceed with a review of the client operations leadership role. There was no mention of termination, just enough ambiguity to let the reader fill in the rest. By the time I reached the office, messages were coming in nonstop. One team lead asked if the rumors were true. Another asked whether they should start updating resumes. A third sent only one line, "Do you know what's happening?" before I could respond. My phone rang again, an unfamiliar number. The caller was a board member I had worked with on major initiatives before. His voice was lowered, cautious. "Anna, I shouldn't be saying this," he said, "but you need to know." He told me Evan had presented a major cost-cutting plan to the board before officially starting. No specific names, no teams mentioned. Just a promise number impressive enough to secure approval. He has to deliver on that promise, the man said. And now he is. The call ended. I sat still for several minutes, watching my phone screen go dark. At noon, I walked into the small conference room where my team was waiting. I didn't speak long. I didn't soften it. "I won't ask any of you to work at half your value," I said, "and I won't stay to normalize this decision." That afternoon, I submitted my resignation. 3 team leads followed me out. No drama, no speeches, just quiet nods of agreement. As I walked out of the building, the only question left in my mind was, had I just destroyed my own career 3 days after I resigned? My personal inbox was still busy, not with messages from the company, but from clients. The first email arrived Thursday morning. A longtime client asked a single question. "Anna, I emailed your team yesterday and haven't heard back. Is something wrong?" I stared at the words before replying. I was no longer there. I wasn't responsible, but I also knew that before. Emails like that were rarely unanswered for more than an hour. By noon, another call came. A second client, confused. I was just notified that my account manager changed. "Why didn't you tell me?" The same issues kept repeating. Emails routed incorrectly, processes looping, familiar questions needing to be explained from scratch. That weekend, a new manager misread a contract renewal clause. Not catastrophic, but enough to make a client pause a previously discussed expansion. "We need more time," they told me on the phone. "It just doesn't feel as certain anymore." I listened. I didn't intervene. I didn't even confirm that I had resigned. What surprised me wasn't that problems occurred, but how fast they did. As if a system built around people had suddenly lost its axis. Every conversation ended with the same question, phrased differently each time. "Did you leave?" I avoided answering, not to save face, but to maintain a boundary. When no one explains, clients draw their own conclusions. And once trust begins to wobble, revenue only moves one way. The question was no longer whether this would matter, but when clients lose confidence in your company, does revenue rise or fall? About 3 weeks after I left, the first numbers began to surface. Not in the press, not in public statements, but in internal reports passed quietly between departments. A contact in finance sent me a screenshot. No commentary, just a weekly revenue comparison, with a trend line slowly but clearly descending. "Not critical yet," he texted, "but it's not fine." In meetings I no longer attended, Evan repeated the same phrase over and over: market conditions. The market is unpredictable. The market is volatile. The market requires adjustments. No one mentioned that client operations had lost over half its senior leadership in a single week. No one talked about long-standing relationships being handed off to people who had never managed a real crisis. Meanwhile, compliance began issuing formal warnings. I didn't see them directly. I heard through a short message from inside the system. Compliance sent 3 memos in 2 weeks. None were acknowledged. Evan kept meeting, kept presenting, kept treating cost optimization as the universal answer. One afternoon, another message arrived anonymous. 1 line only. "He hasn't let go of you." In meetings. "Everything still circles back to blaming you." I read it twice, then locked my screen. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't regret. Just confirmation that what I feared was unfolding exactly in sequence. Exactly on schedule. The company didn't collapse because I left. It simply stopped standing once no one remained who truly understood how it worked. The question forming in my mind was, Had everything started unraveling the moment I walked out the door, I learned the truth late one evening. In the most corporate way possible, no drama, no announcement, just a short call after business hours. The caller was a board member who had previously asked me to lead risk assessments years earlier. His voice was careful, as if rehearsing each sentence. "Anna," he said, "do you remember the revenue dependency report you submitted 2 years ago I did? It analyzed the risk of nearly half the company's revenue being tied directly to relationships managed by my team. I had proposed diversification, succession planning, and phased transitions." "Yes," I said. "I updated it quarterly." There was a pause. "We didn't see those updates in Evan's materials." He continued, "There's no indication that cutting your team would trigger a systemic revenue risk." I understood immediately. Evan hadn't simplified the issue. He had failed to disclose it fully. The salary cuts were presented as routine cost optimization, not as a high-risk decision requiring board review. Yet company policy required any change affecting strategic client relationships to be disclosed and approved. "The board will re-examine all cost-cutting decisions in the next meeting," the man said, "and Evan's actions will be questioned." After the call ended, I sat quietly. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I realized that my resignation had unintentionally exposed a void not in my department, but in Evan's leadership. He thought he was cutting cost. In reality, he had triggered a risk he never reported. And for the first time since leaving, I understood the real question wasn't what I'd done, but what had my decision revealed that he never wanted seen. The semi-annual financial review took place on a weekday morning. I wasn't in the room, but I knew it well. The large screen, the long table, the chairs accustomed to growth figures. This time, there was no growth. A finance colleague sent me the agenda the night before, along with a brief note, "Tense meeting." Evan looks uneasy. When the presentation began, Evan maintained his usual composure. He spoke about macroeconomic factors, market cycles, external volatility. But as the slides progressed, his pace slowed. Numbers don't argue. They simply appear. Revenue dipped slightly in the first quarter, then more sharply in the second. Then came the summary slide. Bold letters across the screen read, "Revenue down 49%. No one reacted immediately. Not shock, but silent comparison between that number and decisions made 3 months earlier. A board member asked calmly, "When did the decline begin?" Evan answered, "Avoiding the chart." The next question followed quickly. Which divisions were directly impacted? This time, no one needed to respond. Client operations appeared on the next slide, alongside plunging metrics. The meeting ended quickly, not because there was enough information, but because there was nothing left to debate. The board issued a red alert and suspended Evan's executive authority pending an emergency review. I learned that news later that afternoon. I was sitting in my usual cafe when a message arrived. Evan suspended. Board in emergency session. Strangely, I didn't feel happy or angry. Just a quiet sense of release when what had been ignored could no longer be explained away. The only question left in my mind was who would now pay the price for what was called pay reform. The emergency board meeting took place the following afternoon. I wasn't present, but I understood how such meetings worked. No speeches, only questions and evidence. Evan entered as a suspended executive, still composed, as if attending a technical review. No one interrupted as he defended the cuts, calling them necessary steps and transitional errors. Until Lena Morales spoke, she didn't interrupt. She waited. Lena placed a slim folder on the table, opened her laptop, and spoke evenly. "Before the board proceeds, I need to clarify a procedural issue." She projected a chain of internal emails. No commentary, just timestamps, senders, recipients. "Over the past 3 months," Lena said, "compliance issued 4 formal warnings regarding revenue dependency risks tied to client operations." She paused. None were acknowledged. Evan straightened. "Those emails were advisory." He said, "We needed results." Lena nodded, as if expecting that response. "Then let's look at the results." The next slide showed the revenue decline, perfectly aligned with the timeline of the cuts. 49%, Lena said calmly. Is that what you consider a market noise? Evan hesitated. You're assigning blame, he replied. I can't control client reactions. Lena didn't argue. She delivered one final sentence enough to shift the room. You may not control client reactions, but you are responsible for ignoring disclosed risk. No one spoke afterward. In meetings like that, the most dangerous moment isn't conflict. It's when no one steps in to defend you. The question hanging in the room was simple. Does an authoritarian leader who ignores risk deserve forgiveness? The call came that evening as I walked past familiar streets near my home. Just after leaving my attorney's office, the number wasn't saved, but I knew who it was before it rang a second time. The board chair. I answered beneath a streetlight. His tone was direct. Anna, he said, we need to talk. He explained that Evan had been formally suspended and that all compensation and staffing decisions were under review. No apology, just facts. We want you back, he continued. And not just you, the others who left with you as well. I didn't answer immediately. We're prepared to restore previous compensation, he added, even increase it, and give you full operational authority. I took a slow breath. Under what conditions, I asked? A pause. You would help stabilize the system, he said. We need you right now. 3 months earlier, I'd walked out uncertain whether I was leaving everything behind. Now they were asking me to return not out of sentiment, but necessity. I need time, I said, not to negotiate pay, but to understand what role I'd be returning to. The call ended with one sentence. We'll wait. As I slipped my phone into my pocket, a question clearer than any spreadsheet formed in my mind. If I returned, who would I become? The department head they cut, or the person tasked with fixing what broke? I made my decision exactly 1 week later. Not because of salary, not because of title. I returned because something needed fixing, and if it wasn't me, no one would do it correctly. My first meeting with the board took place in the same room where Evan had once presented pay reform. This time, there were no slogans, just a short decision. Read aloud, Evan Brooks was formally removed as CEO. His contract was terminated for governance and disclosure violations. There was no debate, no negotiation. His career didn't end that day, but it began declining exactly the way numbers had. I was appointed interim CEO in that meeting. My first action wasn't contacting the press. It was calling the people who had walked out with me. Salaries restored, authority returned. No vague promises, only written agreements. The weeks that followed were slow and exhausting, meeting clients, acknowledging leadership failures, rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. Revenue didn't rebound immediately, but it stopped falling. And sometimes, that's survival. One late evening, after most offices were empty, I realized there was one thing I hadn't asked. I found Lena Morales in her small office downstairs. It was you. I said not a question. The reports, the timing, knowing exactly when I needed to know. Lena nodded. I couldn't speak publicly. She said, but I couldn't let you stay blind. We had worked together for over a decade as colleagues, as friends, as professionals who understood the line between silence and complicity. I didn't help you to take anyone down, Lena added. I just did my job. I looked around the room, the company, cracked and flawed, still standing. Evan called it pay reform. I call it the moment he handed me his chair. If this story made you stop and think, hit like to support, subscribe for more stories like this, and leave a comment with your perspective. We read everyone.